Chapter 6. The Globe Theatre. During 1598, Shakespeare wrote another comedy that is still popular today, Much Ado About Nothing. As usual, he used two stories for a comparison. He took one couple, Claudio and Hero, from an Italian story. They have traditional ideas of love and arranged marriage. He invented the other couple, Beatrice and Benedick. They learn that real love is the product of what he calls in one of his sonnets, the marriage of true minds. The character of the comic town policeman, Dogberry, comes from his Stratford childhood. Everything seemed to be going well for the company. James Burbage was dead, and the company now belonged to his sons, Richard and Cuthbert. But in the cold winter of 1598, they had problems. The theatre stood inside the City of London, and the owner of the land refused to let them continue there. They had to perform a number of times at court at Christmas time, and for a month or two they acted in another, smaller building. Then the brothers reached a brave decision. Between their performances at court, they took the whole wooden theatre in pieces across the river to some land outside the city. In the spring, they built a new theatre and called it the Globe. The Burbages needed money, and so they invited the 5 leading members of the company to join them. From this time, Shakespeare was a partner in the theatre. For the new theatre, Shakespeare wrote 3 plays. He finished Henry V to complete the story of the prince, and he also produced a comedy, As You Like It, and a tragedy, Julius Caesar. Laurence Olivier made a great film of Henry V at the end of the Second World War. He was able to show the scenes of fighting in colour in the film. Shakespeare realised how difficult it would be to do this on the stage, so he wrote speeches, which he probably spoke himself, asking the audience to use their imagination. In an Elizabethan theatre, they always had to do this. The theatre was outdoors, and some of the audience stood around the stage in the open air. People could pay more money for seats at the sides. If they wanted to be seen, not to see the play, they could pay to sit on the stage itself. There were only 2 entrances, both at the back of the stage, but there was a special door in the floor where characters like ghosts and devils could suddenly appear. But although the actors had some simple pieces of furniture, the audience had to imagine where the scene was taking place. The dramatist also had to remember that the actors would not always perform in a theatre. They often performed at court. If there was plague in the city and they had to go on tour, they had to act in any building that they could find. Unlike most other dramatists, Shakespeare acted in the plays himself. This was a great advantage. While he was writing, he imagined where the actors would be. His plays are full of lines that tell the audience what is happening and show the actors what to do. The main story of his beautiful comedy, As You Like It, comes from a popular book by Thomas Lodge. Early in the play, the heroine, Rosalind, and her cousin, Celia, go to the forest to look for Rosalind's father. Perhaps the actors put up 2 or 3 trees on the stage, but the audience knew that the girls had arrived when Rosalind said, "Well, this is the forest of Arden." In the same way, Shakespeare told the audience when characters were coming on the stage or going off. He gave them a picture of the scene and told them the time. Plays at the Globe were acted in the afternoon, but the first scene of Hamlet begins at midnight and ends as Horatio describes the sun coming up over a hill in the east. Although it may seem that the audience had to use their imagination all the time, Elizabethan theatres had one great advantage when compared with most theatres today. The stage area was much bigger, and the actors could stand in the middle of the audience. It was easier for a character like Richard III or Hamlet to make the audience believe that the other actors on the stage could not hear him. He was much nearer to the audience than to them. In the second scene of Hamlet, at least 10 actors came onto the stage. They placed thrones for the king and queen, and stood near them while Claudius made a long political speech. Everyone was dressed in bright colours to celebrate the wedding of Claudius and Gertrude, except Hamlet, who was dressed in black. He stood at the front of the stage, as far from the king and queen as possible, and told the audience what he thought of them. The Globe immediately became the most popular theatre in London. In September 1599, a Swiss visitor, Thomas Platter, saw a performance of Julius Caesar there. His diary gives us an idea of what an Elizabethan performance was like. Even after a tragedy, the actors danced. I saw the tragedy of Julius Caesar with at least 15 characters very well acted. At the end, they danced according to their custom. Chapter 7. Hamlet, the Last Comedy and a Lucky Escape. Hamlet is probably Shakespeare's greatest play. It is certainly the most famous. But today's Hamlets are usually very different from each other and from the one that Shakespeare wrote about in 1600. Goethe began this fashion 200 years ago. He said that Hamlet was a gentle young man, unable to obey his father's command that he must revenge his murder. After that, it was easy to imagine that he was a man who could not make up his mind. But to some modern writers, Hamlet is cruel and violent, and not really the hero. Others have suggested that Hamlet's relationship with his mother is the most important point in the play. It is also often difficult today to know whether the actor thinks that Hamlet is really mad or is only pretending to be. Shakespeare had seen a play about Hamlet when he first came to London, probably written by Thomas Kyd. We only know that Kyd's play had a ghost who called for revenge, but there was probably a scene like the one where the actors act the murder of Hamlet's father, proving that Claudius is guilty. Kyd had a scene like this in the Spanish tragedy. Shakespeare had also read the story in a translation from the French and had studied a medical book. He had to show the difference between someone who really goes mad, like Ophelia, and someone like Hamlet who has suffered a shock but at times pretends to be mad to trick his enemies. Here are a few short answers to the problems that modern directors have with Hamlet. Officially, Protestants, like Hamlet's friend Horatio, did not believe in ghosts for religious reasons. So when the ghost first appears, Horatio is sure that it is the devil. Hamlet thinks that it may be the devil, so he has to wait until he can prove that the king is guilty before taking his revenge. He sees his opportunity halfway through the play when he asks the actors to perform a play with a scene like his father's murder. But even then, only he and Horatio understand why the king is shocked. If they have not read the story, the audience do not know if the ghost is the devil either, until just before that scene. After that, Hamlet acts immediately, but by mistake kills the minister, Polonius, Ophelia's father, instead of the king. He does not have another opportunity until the end of the play. Polonius's death is the cause of the tragedy. Ophelia goes mad, and her brother Laertes, when he returns from France, is in the same situation as Hamlet. The king blames Hamlet, and Laertes wants revenge. He is more typical of an Elizabethan gentleman than Hamlet. He does not stop to find out if the king's story is true. He says that he will cut Hamlet's throat in the church. The Elizabethan audience shared Hamlet's view of his mother's marriage to his uncle. For them, this was the same as a man marrying his sister. So when the king, pretending that he is Hamlet's friend, calls him my cousin, relative, and my son, Hamlet turns away from him. He tells the audience that the king is closer than a relative but less than natural. Elizabethan audiences were never in doubt about Hamlet's madness. Shakespeare used different forms of language for his speeches. These showed clearly when he was shocked by his father's death and his mother's marriage, and when he was pretending. Most audiences admire Hamlet, but it is true that he changes during the play. We admire the Hamlet that we see at the end. Then he speaks calmly to Horatio, saying that the opportunity to revenge his father will come in time, and he will be ready. We should also recognize that the tradition in revenge plays is similar to the tradition in a Western film. The villain had to be the cause of his own death. In the same way, the bad man in a Western always reaches for his gun first, before the hero shoots him. If the hero shot first, we would not like it. Shakespeare gives us his idea of Hamlet in the words of Ophelia. When she thinks that he is mad, she speaks of him as he was before the play began and as he is again at the end. He is the perfect Elizabethan prince, a man who knows how to behave in society, who reads books to increase his knowledge of the world, and who will fight bravely when this is necessary. At this time, Shakespeare also wrote Twelfth Night, his last romantic comedy. It is a fine play, with wonderfully funny scenes and beautiful romantic speeches. But there is a kind of sadness about it that lasts even after the happy ending. Orsino, the hero, is in love with the idea of love, but Viola, the heroine, is really in love. She acts as Orsino's servant for most of the play, dressed as a boy. In the end, we feel that he does not really deserve her. At the end of Twelfth Night, Feste, one of the main comic characters in the play, sings a song. Will Kemp had left the company, and a different actor, Robert Armin, who could sing well, had taken his place. Shakespeare wrote the comic parts in his plays to suit him. The meaning of Feste's song is not clear, but it may be about an actor's life. It is a hard life. The wind blows and the rain falls every day. When Feste sings about men shutting their gates against thieves, we remember that councils disliked actors and wanted to shut them out. But at the end of the song, Feste tells the audience that they will try to please them every day. John Manningham, a law student, kept a diary. Law students in London were fond of plays and could afford to pay the actors to put on special performances for them. Manningham saw Twelfth Night in February 1602, and the next month he wrote down a story that he had heard about Burbage and Shakespeare. Burbage had seen a good-looking woman in the audience and arranged to meet her. But Shakespeare had heard the conversation, and when Burbage knocked on her door, Shakespeare was already making love to her. Her servant gave Burbage a message from Shakespeare, saying, "William the first King of England, came before Richard III, Burbage's most famous part." The story is almost certainly not true. It is the kind of joke that students invent about famous people. But it shows that by this time they thought of Burbage and Shakespeare as stars. Although Shakespeare did not act the hero or the villain in his plays, people knew that he was one of the main reasons for his company's success. Students at Cambridge University had written a comedy about actors a year or two before this, and in that play the characters were Burbage, Kemp, and Shakespeare. Between writing Hamlet and Twelfth Night, Shakespeare had had a lucky escape. His company had always supported the Earl of Essex, who was popular with the ordinary people, and the Earl of Southampton was Essex's closest friend. Essex had been a favourite at court for many years. Although he had annoyed the Queen and the government on several occasions, they gave him the command of the army when the Irish rebelled in 1599. Shakespeare included a speech in Henry V, comparing him to the hero of that play. But Essex failed. He was ordered to stay at home and keep away from the court. Early in February 1601, one of his friends asked Shakespeare's company to perform Richard II, a play in which the king loses the throne. Essex and his friends wanted to see it before they rode to the Queen's palace. The actors agreed, but the next day Essex failed to get any popular support. He was sent to prison and executed a few days later. Southampton was lucky to escape with his life, but stayed in prison until the Queen died in 1603. Augustine Phillips, one of the actors, defended his friends at the trial. He said that they had only acted Richard II because they were offered more money. It is unlikely that the Queen believed him. She told one of the lords at court, "I am Richard II. You know that, don't you?" But she did not punish the actors or the man who had written the play. Perhaps she was so fond of plays that she did not want to lose the best actors in the country. Instead, she warned them of the danger. They were ordered to perform at court on the night before Essex was executed. Troilus and Cressida was the last play that Shakespeare wrote during the old Queen's reign. It is a clever cruel play, popular then and now with young people, and was probably first performed for the law students in London. The traditional characters, Hector and Troilus, have simple beliefs about love and war. But in the real world, Shakespeare suggests neither love nor war is fair. In the end, people win by using force. Achilles murders Hector, and Cressida accepts Diomedes as her lover because she has never believed that love can last. The play is typical of attitudes in the last year of the old Queen's reign. People looked back at the past sadly and were not confident about the future. Towards the end of 1601, John Shakespeare died. He had lived long enough to see his son become the most successful man in Stratford. He left his 2 houses to William. Joan, William's sister, lived in one with her husband, and a man and his wife rented the other as a pub. Chapter 8. Towards Tragedy. In February 1603, Queen Elizabeth died. Her nearest relative, James, King of Scotland, became King of England too. Shakespeare's company had reason to be pleased. The Earl of Southampton came out of prison and soon became a favourite of the new King and Queen. James decided to take personal control of the theatre companies. Only 2 were allowed to operate. Shakespeare's company became the King's Men. The other company was called the Queen's. Shakespeare probably gave up acting at about this time. He had never played the main parts. According to later stories about him, he had a fine voice and usually took serious parts, kings, dukes, or old men. In Hamlet, for example, he played the ghost. There was a practical reason for this. Shakespeare was the director of his own plays, and the most difficult scenes are usually at the end when almost all the characters are on the stage. He needed to be off the stage to organize the other actors, so he usually played the part of a man who was dead or had disappeared before the end. His next 2 plays, All's Well That Ends Well and Measure for Measure, are not completely successful. Shakespeare was still using stories from popular sources, but by this time his characters were too real to support the happy ending of a fairy story. All's Well That Ends Well does not end well. The nasty young hero, Bertram, who has refused to marry a girl from a lower social class, does not deserve her. Measure for Measure has some wonderful scenes, but it annoys women today. The heroine, Isabella, refuses to sleep with the judge to save her brother's life, but does not mind when another girl takes her place. We cannot accept this kind of solution to a problem if the characters seem real. But there was one advantage for Shakespeare in using this story by an Italian writer, Cinthio. In the same book, he found the story for his next play, Othello. Shakespeare wrote 3 tragedies between 1604 and 1606, Othello, King Lear, and Macbeth. If we compare them with his sources, we can understand their meaning from the changes that he made. Each of these 3 plays is great, but the characters, the subject, and the language are different. As always, he does not repeat his successes, but moves on to something new. Like Hamlet, Othello is often misunderstood because people already have an idea of him in their minds when they come to the theatre. They suppose that he is a typical jealous husband. But this is the Othello of Cinthio's story, not of Shakespeare's play. Cinthio's characters do not have names, and the Moor and his wife are already married. An officer who became Iago in Shakespeare's play makes the Moor believe that his wife has slept with another officer, who became Cassio. The Moor and the officer murder her together. There is a trial, but neither of them is proved guilty. Afterwards, the wife's relatives kill the Moor, and the officer explains what really happened when he is in prison for another crime. Shakespeare knew that jealous husbands usually belong to comedy, not tragedy. But Desdemona loves Othello so much that she dies saying that she killed herself. Before he introduced Cinthio's story, almost halfway through the play, Shakespeare had to show Othello as a great man, and Othello and Desdemona as two people who are very much in love. This love is destroyed by the lies of a clever man, Iago. Shakespeare's audience were probably surprised by the scenes that he added at the beginning. Black men were usually shown as devils on the stage, not because people hated them in real life, they had probably never seen a black person, but because black was the devil's colour. But in this play, the devil is white. Shakespeare's attitude becomes clear if we realise that at this time he was living with a family of French Protestants, the Mountjoys. Protestants had suffered for their religious beliefs in France, but when some moved to England, they were unpopular because they worked so hard. Just before he wrote Othello, Shakespeare was asked to write some scenes for a play about Sir Thomas More, Henry VIII's minister, who was executed because he did not agree to the king's marriage to Anne Boleyn. The play was never acted, but we have a scene in Shakespeare's own writing. Sir Thomas asks a crowd of people in London who have been attacking foreigners, "How would you feel if you went to a foreign country like France, and people did not accept you as human beings?" Othello defends himself at the end of the play, saying that he is not jealous by nature. Everyone in the play, even Emilia, his wife, believes that Iago is the honest soldier that he pretends to be. But Shakespeare shows us why Othello is tricked. He loves his beautiful young wife, but he has never really understood why she loves him. She comes from one of the best families in Venice, but she has fallen in love with a black man, a foreigner, a man almost old enough to be her father. Although he is a great soldier, and the Venetians have given him command of their army, Othello has no experience of women. In Othello, the love between husband and wife is destroyed. The next play, King Lear, is about parents and children. There was an old play about King Lear that we can compare with Shakespeare's. The story also appeared in Histories of Britain, although there was no real King Lear. In all the sources, Lear was an old king with 3 daughters, 2 bad and 1 good. He decided to divide the country between them equally, but he asked them to tell him which of them loved him most. Two daughters made long speeches, saying how much they loved him. But the third, in Shakespeare's play Cordelia, did not. King Lear was angry and sent her away, but found that the older daughters were cruel to him when she had gone. In Shakespeare's play, the two older daughters are married, so they have to say that they love their father more than their husbands. Lear goes mad, and in his madness discovers that he is not a king, but only a man. For comparison, Shakespeare also used another story by Sir Philip Sidney about a man with one good son and one bad one, and gave the father the name of Gloucester. Finally, in all the sources, there is a happy ending. Gloucester dies happily in the arms of his good son. This is the kind of ending that we can expect in stories. But the ending of Lear's story shows us a world where there is no God to save us from suffering. In this world, we can only believe in human love. And this is not enough to save us from dying, or even worse, to save the lives of the people that we love. Lear comes onto the stage at the end of the play, carrying the dead body of Cordelia in his arms. We realize then that it does not matter who is king or queen, or who has political power in the country. Lear's best-loved child is dead, and he can do nothing to change that. At such moments, most dramatists of Shakespeare's time wrote long speeches for the actor. But Shakespeare always uses simple language in scenes like these. He wanted to make sure that everyone in the audience understood what was happening. And so King Lear, before he dies of a broken heart, says that he will never see his daughter again. Never, 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 never. Perhaps in this play, Shakespeare showed how he felt about the death of his only son. The patron of Shakespeare's company was now a Scottish king, and so Macbeth, the third great tragedy, was probably written to please him. The story is taken from a history of Scotland, and James I believed that he belonged to the family of one of the characters, Banquo. When Shakespeare began to write about a hero who becomes a villain, he was probably thinking of the lucky escape that James had had on the 5th of November, 1605. Some Catholics tried to kill him with an explosion under the Houses of Parliament. The Earl of Southampton and the brothers of two of Shakespeare's friends were there. The date is still celebrated in Britain every year as Guy Fawkes Day. When Shakespeare began writing plays, characters alone on the stage spoke to the audience mainly to tell them what was going to happen. But by the time he wrote Macbeth, he could show the hero's mind working. Before and after Macbeth murders the king, we hear him thinking about his actions. In this way, we can see how he realizes that one crime leads to another. He never feels guilty about anything that he has done, but we are unable to look away from the stage because of the power and beauty of the language. Shakespeare's speeches, in his greatest plays, suit the character who is speaking and come naturally from what is happening on the stage. In plays like Macbeth, we remember the lines because of the pictures that Shakespeare paints in our minds. Halfway through the play, Macbeth decides to kill the wife and children of his enemy, Macduff. Why not? he asks himself. He imagines that he is halfway across a river of blood. It is so deep that he would feel as tired if he went back as if he crossed over to the other side. He does not feel guilty. By now, another crime is just something that makes him tired, not something that he is sorry for. Macbeth and the later tragedies show that Shakespeare, like other Elizabethan dramatists, thought that tragedy simply meant the fall of a great man. The man did not need to be good. Most audiences admire Hamlet and feel sorry for Othello and King Lear, but Macbeth is a villain. Shakespeare's opinion of him and of all political leaders like him is clear from the words that he puts into Macbeth's own mouth at the end. Macbeth realizes that after all his crimes, he has none of the things that people look forward to when they grow old. Love, friends, the knowledge that people admire them. The people around him only obey him because they are